We all think the ancient world operated within the boundaries we've drawn for it. No electricity, no advanced knowledge of chemistry, no understanding of distant continents, just fire, stone, and survival. But what if I told you that researchers have uncovered objects so out of place, so technically sophisticated, and so deeply puzzling that they don't just challenge our assumptions about the past, they make those assumptions look almost childish. Because scattered across history, in museums, in libraries, and in the ground itself, are 4 artifacts that force us to rethink the timeline of human ingenuity. And the more carefully you look at each one, the more you start to realize that the ancient world was far more complex than we ever gave it credit for. First, the Baghdad Battery. In 1936, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was working in the National Museum of Iraq when he came across a small clay jar that had been sitting in storage, largely ignored, for years. At first glance, it really did look like nothing more than a basic ancient container, the kind of simple vessel you would expect from a civilization that existed over 2,000 years ago. But when he examined the inside, something immediately didn't add up. Fitted inside the jar was a copper cylinder, and inside that cylinder was an iron rod, sealed with an asphalt plug. The jar was found near Baghdad, and dated back to the era of the Parthian Empire, roughly between 250 BCE and 224 CE. Koenig looked at this deliberate arrangement of dissimilar metals and proposed a radical theory. It was an ancient electrochemical cell when modern scientists recreated the vessel and filled it with an acidic liquid, like grape juice or vinegar. Something remarkable happened. The device actually produced a measurable electric voltage. For decades, this single experiment fueled theories that ancient craftsmen were using these jars for electroplating gold onto silver, hundreds of years before the battery was officially invented. It's a story that lodges itself in your mind. But here's where the true mystery of archaeology comes in, because the real puzzle isn't that the Parthians had electricity. The puzzle is how easily modern minds project modern technology onto the ancient world. Today, archaeologists have a much more grounded but equally fascinating explanation. No wires, no electrical equipment, and no electroplated artifacts have ever been found from this region and era. Instead, researchers point out that these jars perfectly match storage vessels used for sacred scrolls. The copper and iron weren't meant to generate a charge. They were likely an armature to protect a delicate papyrus scroll wrapped around the rod. Over 2 millennia, the organic papyrus completely rotted away, leaving only the metal skeleton behind. The Baghdad Battery doesn't prove ancient people had electricity. It proves they understood the chemical properties of preservation. And it reminds us that if you look at the past wearing modern glasses, you might see a battery where there was only a bookshelf. The Iron Pillar of Delhi. Stand at the center of Delhi's Qutb complex, and you will find an iron pillar that has been standing in the open air for over 1,600 years. It has survived monsoons, scorching summers, freezing winters, and the slow destructive crawl of time that has brought far younger structures to ruin. And yet the pillar stands without a single flake of rust on its main surface. No corrosion, no deterioration. Just smooth, dark, ancient iron rising nearly 7 meters into the sky as if it were installed last decade. The pillar was erected during the reign of Chandragupta II, a Gupta Empire ruler who governed India roughly between 375 and 415 CE. For a long time, the fact that a solid iron column of this size could resist the fundamental laws of chemistry was treated as an unexplainable anomaly, because iron corrodes. Every bridge engineer, every archaeologist, every metallurgist knows this, and yet this pillar has spent 16 centuries outdoors and refuses to obey. When modern scientists finally analyzed the pillar's composition, they solved the mystery, but the answer only made the ancient builders look even more brilliant. They found that the surface of the iron contained an unusually high concentration of phosphorus. Because ancient Indian iron smelters used a specific charcoal-based forging method, and didn't use lime to remove phosphorus like modern foundries do, they unknowingly created a chemical anomaly. This elevated phosphorus catalyzed the creation of a protective layer on the metal's surface called misolite, an iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate that essentially forms a self-sealing barrier against moisture. But here's where the story becomes more than just impressive ancient engineering. The ancient Indian blacksmiths didn't have modern chemistry textbooks or digital thermometers. They achieved this perfect, rust-proof composition through sheer, empirical mastery of their craft. They perfected a metallurgical technique that industrial-era foundries later struggled to understand. The Iron Pillar of Delhi isn't magic. It is the ultimate surviving monument to human trial, error, and physical genius, a level of practical knowledge that humanity largely forgot when we traded the blacksmith's forge for the industrial blast furnace. Third, the Piri Reis map. A Turkish naval officer was cataloging old maps stored in a Topkapi palace in Istanbul. when he came across a document drawn on gazelle skin. The map was dated 1513 and signed by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. Drawn onto that 500-year-old parchment, with careful detail and confident lines, were the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and a surprisingly detailed rendering of South America. Alternative historians claimed this map showed something impossible: the ice-free coast of Antarctica, a continent not officially discovered until 1820. They argued the map must have been based on surveys from a lost, prehistoric Ice Age civilization. It is a thrilling theory, but the historical truth hidden in the ink of this map is actually a much greater archaeological treasure. Piri Reis himself left behind a note in the margins of the map, explicitly stating his sources. He wrote that he compiled his masterpiece from about 20 older charts, including ancient Ptolemaic maps, Portuguese maps, and most crucially, a map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself. This is the real breathtaking mystery of the Piri Reis map. The original maps that Columbus drew of the New World have been completely lost to history. But because Piri Reis captured a Spanish sailor who had sailed with Columbus and acquired those charts, this Ottoman map from 1513 is the only surviving echo of Columbus's original lost drawings. And as for Antarctica, cartographers in the 16th century widely believed in Terra Australis Incognita, a massive hypothetical southern continent that they thought had to exist to balance out the weight of Europe and Asia in the north. Because the southern coast of South America hadn't been fully explored yet, Piri Reis simply connected the tip of the Americas to this imaginary mythical landmass. The map doesn't show an impossible ice-free Antarctica. It shows a snapshot of a world waking up, blending brand new discoveries with ancient myths, frozen forever on a piece of gazelle skin. The Voynich manuscript. Somewhere in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University sits a book that has defeated every expert who has ever tried to read it. It is called the Voynich manuscript, named after the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. And it is one of the most thoroughly studied and completely unresolved documents in human history. The manuscript is roughly 240 pages long, filled with handwritten text in an entirely unknown script. It is illustrated throughout with detailed drawings of plants that don't quite match any known species, astronomical diagrams that don't correspond to any recognized system, and figures of small human forms bathing in strange interconnected pools. Carbon dating places the physical parchment somewhere between 1404 and 1438 CE. The ink, the materials, the binding, all of it is consistent with the early 15th century. So whoever wrote this book was a real person, using real materials, and they clearly spent enormous effort filling hundreds of pages with a system of writing that they fully understood, and that the rest of the world for over 600 years has completely failed to crack. What makes the manuscript different from a deliberate hoax is the internal structure of the text itself. Cryptographers and computational linguists have found that the writing follows statistical patterns consistent with a real language, like Zipf's law. The frequency of characters, the clustering of words, the rhythms of repetition, all of these features match what you would expect from a genuine written language or a highly complex phonetic cipher. It almost certainly means something. It is just saying it in a way nobody alive today can interpret. Over the centuries, the manuscript has attracted some of the most brilliant analytical minds in the world. Military codebreakers who dismantled the most sophisticated encryption systems of World War II turned their attention to it and walked away defeated. Modern computer scientists have run the text through advanced algorithmic analysis and artificial intelligence systems, finding tantalizing structural patterns, but no translation. What the Voynich manuscript ultimately represents is something that very few objects in human history can claim to be. It is a piece of evidence that absolutely refuses to yield. In a world where almost every historical mystery eventually surrenders to technology or scholarship, this record keeps it secret. It means that somewhere in the gap between what we know and what this manuscript contains, there is a piece of human knowledge or imagination that has been completely and perhaps permanently lost. 4 objects, 4 different corners of history. And while science has helped us understand the brilliant chemistry of the Delhi pillar, the lost sources of the Piri Reis map, and the true purpose of the Baghdad jars, they all still contain a core truth that the modern world struggles to accept. They prove that ancient humans were not simple. They were brilliant, empirical, and immensely capable. They raise a much bigger question about the story we tell ourselves about human history, about how linear we think progress is, about how much practical genius we might have already forgotten, and about how much, sitting quietly in museums and libraries and still unexcavated ground, is still waiting to change our minds.